Hey guys, today I will be reading a one-shot fic, Obsessed by ASharksReadingGlasses. Now this is part of a series, please go check out the other fics, and further information will be in the description. From Unknown. Hey, I stole this number from Peter. Don't tell him, okay? I have an important question. You have saved Unknown as Expired Puddle. To Expired Puddle. Wade. It is 4 a.m. This better be urgent. From Expired Puddle. Do guests have names? To Expired Puddle. I'm going back to sleep. From Expired Puddle. Come on, Danny, I'm dying to know. To Expired Puddle. That was horrible, even for me, and I'm almost dead. From Expired Puddle. Pretty please. To Expired Puddle. Shades don't really have names. Like I said before, they can't talk, and their awareness is limited to I and them. The only ghosts I know of that have names are spectres, and it sounds like they name themselves. From Expired Puddle. So what you're saying is, it's okay if I name them Fido. To Expired Puddle. They're not a dog, Wade. From Expired Puddle. It's a placeholder name. Typing. To Expired Puddle. Alright, fine. Is Fido still visible? I didn't think I gave them that much ectoplasm. From Expired Puddle. No, they disappeared a while ago, but now that I'm more aware of them, I can sort of feel them, I guess. They like to sit on my shoulder or cuddle into my neck. It's kind of distracting. To Expired Puddle. Sorry, I didn't think they'd bother you that much. From Expired Puddle. Don't worry about it, Home Slice. It's cool. To Expired Puddle. Well, if that's all the burning questions you have, I'm going back to bed now. Talk to you later, Wade. From Expired Puddle. What? We haven't even exchanged embarrassing stories. To Expired Puddle. Good night, Wade. From Expired Puddle. You're no fun. Danny woke up to the sound of the hotel shower running, his eyes watery as he struggled to wake up. He turned over under the sheets to look at the nightstand, the digital clock reading 8:31 a.m, and Jazz's bed empty. Danny groaned and dragged a pillow over his head to muffle the sounds of Jazz in the shower, hoping to catch a few more winks before his phone alarm went off at 9. Just as he was about to drift off, someone was knocking at the hotel door. Danny pressed the pillow tighter over his head and snuggled deeper under the covers, hoping whoever was there would just go away, but the knocking continued after a moment. Danny, Jazz shouted through the bathroom, get the door, it's probably Mum and Dad. Danny frowned as he pulled his head out from under the pillows and threw off the covers, rubbing his eyes as he got up and slinked to the door. I don't remember making plans to have breakfast with them this morning, Danny thought as he unlatched the chain and opened the door. Morning, Dano, Dad said, smiling way too brightly for this early in the morning. His mum and Dad had traded in their hazmat jumpsuits for some nondescript shirts and plain jeans, but it was a little weird seeing them so normal. Hey, Dad, Danny yawned, brushing his bangs out of his eyes and moving aside to let his parents in. Danny, you're still in your pyjamas, Mum scolded. Did you just wake up? Didn't know we were on a tight schedule, Danny yawned again, going to his suitcase at the end of his bed, yanking it off the top of the covers. He unzipped the sides and pulled out some clean clothes, his favourite NASA t-shirt, and a worn pair of jeans with a hole in one of the knees, clean socks, and some underwear. You didn't get our text messages? Mum asked. Danny thought back to yesterday, trying to remember. After lunch with his parents, they had split up again. Jazz had planned to visit the Museum of Modern Art. His parents went to the mall to buy a few phones, a tablet so they and tablets they could cannibalize into new ghost tech. And Danny had headed to a movie theatre close to the hotel to binge watch a few movies he was meant to be seeing. It wasn't as fun without Sam and Tucker, but looking at the attendant's face when he finished 2 family-sized popcorn balls had been hilarious. He turned off his phone as soon as the preview for the first movie started, and didn't turn it back on until he was out of the theatre around 8:45 p.m. Danny recalled seeing a few message notifications from his parents, but assumed it was one of their safety check-ins, had responded without reading the message, and headed back to the hotel room. He texted his friends for a few hours asking if there was some troublesome ghost that had come through town since he was gone. Luckily, nothing too bad had been spotted that they couldn't handle themselves. By the time they had given him a detailed rundown, it was around 10, and Danny decided to get some shut-eye. Sorry, Danny apologizes, zipped his suitcase and laid back on his bed. I thought they were check-ins. What were you doing this morning? We're having breakfast with an old college buddy, Vlad, Dad announced happily. We're what? Danny shouted, sitting up so fast he went dizzy. It was the strangest thing, Dad continued like Danny hadn't just shouted to Kingdom Come, sitting down on Jazz's bed. We bumped into each other on the way to the mall. Wow, Danny said sarcastically. What a real coincidence. It really is, Mum smiled, sitting next to her husband. He invited us for breakfast as an apology for what happened in Wisconsin. Oh, it'll be so nice to catch up with him again. Yeah, Danny grimaced. More like torture. Breakfast had been a nightmare. Danny and Jazz had mostly been quiet as the adults talked, Jazz out of politeness as she listened, and Danny out of pettiness as he sulked. It was gross watching Vlad subtly hit on his mum and insult his dad. The insult seemed to roll off his dad's back, and he was even able to turn it around on Vlad a couple of times, making it a way to compliment his mum, which was sweet, but still gross. Danny had tried to stop it with a sly dig that only Vlad would get, but the plan backfired when the smug Fruit Loop had convinced his parents that it would be a good idea for Vlad to tag along with Danny around the city, and now here he was, slouched with his arms crossed on a bench on Flushing Meadow Park, when Vlad sat on the other side in an all-black press suit as he sipped smugly on coffee. Danny had been looking forward to possibly meeting up with Wade and Peter later that day, but he wasn't going anywhere near them unless he was sure Vlad had no possible way of tailing him. So what trouble have you gotten into since you were here, little badger? Vlad asked as he crossed his legs. None of your business, Danny snapped, clenching his arms. Oh, come on now, Daniel, Vlad responded in his know-it-all mocking tone of his. You haven't noticed anything off? Feeling a bit peckish and tired lately? He knows, Danny realised, feeling something sink in his stomach. He knows I'm not at the top of my game right now. Shit, I need to lose him. I need help. Danny stayed silent and grabbed his phone out of his pants pocket and opened his text messages. It's rude to text someone when someone else is talking to you, Danielle, Vlad stated, taking another mouthful of coffee. Yeah, Danny responded hotly while he typed, making sure Vlad couldn't see who was texting. Well, last time I checked, we aren't friends, or even on good terms, Placimus. Vlad's eyes flashed red and he smirked darkly. 2. Arachnophobia. Hey, quick question. You have any suggestions for getting rid of a creep that's been tailing me? Call from Arachnophobia. Danny blinked and glanced back at Vlad before answering the call. Where are you? Peter asked, his phone voice dead serious and boding no arguments. Danny gulped and tried to play it cool, hoping that Pete would understand what he was doing. "Hey, Tuck," Danny responded. "Kinda have a change of plans. I'm at the south side of Flushing Meadow Park right now. I won't have time to visit Stock Tower today. Buddy, sorry." "We're on our way," Peter stated, catching up a quick. "They're right next to you, aren't they? How long have you been followed? Any description you can give me?" Danny could hear the whoosh of air and the flip of Peter's webs as well as Wade's voice in the background. "It's been a pretty bad morning since breakfast," Danny replied, keeping Vlad in his periphery. "But you know how Vlad is." Vlad whipped his head towards Danny at the mention of his name and glared. "Vlad? Danny, is that his name?" Peter asked frantically. "Do you know who's following you?" "Yeah," Danny answered casually. "I'll explain what happened to you later." "You're doing great, Danny," Peter reassured him. "It's gonna be okay. I'm almost there, and Wade is right behind me." Danny felt sweat gathering at his brow. The park wasn't that crowded, and it would be easy for Vlad to overshadow Peter or Wade if they got too close. He didn't want to take the chance. "Tucker!" Danny said frantically, sitting up. "Don't even think about touching my computer." There was a pause over the line as Peter tried to decode his meaning, and Danny could see Vlad's gaze as he started to pay attention. "Danny, I'm sorry," Peter answered, confused. "I don't know what you're trying to tell me." "Tucker, I mean it," Danny tried again. "Do not go anywhere near my computer. If you do, something bad will happen and you'll fry the circuit. You want to give me suggestions? Do it from your phone." "Okay, alright, I've got it, Danny," Peter replied before letting out a shaky breath. "Shit, okay, think, come on. Peter, you got this. You got this. Danny, here's what's gonna happen. I'm gonna get in touch with Wade and see if he has any ideas. But I'm not gonna hang up or drop the call, understand? Just give me 2 minutes tops, and I'll be back on the line, alright?" Danny swallowed shakily but tried to keep his cool. "Yeah, Tuck, I got it," Danny said as he slumped back into the bench, trying to loosen the tension in his neck and shoulders. "I'll wait." "Go ahead and take a look." His phone clicked to the hold tone as Peter switched calls, and Danny anxiously started to count down the seconds. "What are you playing at, little badger?" Vlad asked suspiciously, and Danny shifted his eyes towards him. "I'm not playing at anything," Danny responded snappishly, clutching the phone tightly in his ear as wishing Peter would hurry the fuck up. "I'm trying to do something fun on my vacation while you're being a creepy stalker. Sorry if I wanted to find something that would fit your delicate sensibilities." Vlad glared at the comment, crushing his empty coffee cup in his hands before smiling like a fox and calmly disposing it in the trash can beside the bench. "All right, Daniel," Vlad said as he brushed imaginary dust from his slacks. "I'll play a little game. For now, but whatever you're planning, it won't work." Danny shivered in a mix of trepidation and resentment, and about to retort when Peter finally came back on the line. "Danny, you there?" Peter asked anxiously. "Yeah, Tuck, I'm here," Danny answered. "What you got for me?" "Here's the game plan," Peter answered, his voice straining. "The nearest subway entrance is at the corner on the 78th Crescent, Union Turnpike, and Queen's Blood. I'll be one of the surrounding buildings. Do what you can to get down to the subway and lose him there. I'll keep my phone open, so if you have any trouble you can call me. If he tries to stop you, make a goddamn scene. Do you hear me? Scream, yell for help, scratch his face off. I don't care. much. Give me a reason to get down there. Do you understand so far? First option sounds great. Danny replied, hating the possibility of Peter getting that close to Vlad. Where do I go from there? Ride the subway for a few stops, then call Wade. He'll have a taxi that will take you back to the safe house. You ready to do this? Peter asked. Yeah, Tuck, Danny said as he licked his lips. I'll talk to you later. You got this, Danny, Peter encouraged. Then the line clicked dead. Danny snapped his phone shut and put it back in his pocket before he pushed himself from the bench. What droll activity have you found to amuse yourself with, Danielle? Vlad asked as he graciously stood up. Natural History Museum, Danny answered, keeping his response quick and natural. They have a space exhibit I wanted to see. Danny took a moment to casually check his surroundings for indicators of where to go. Luckily, the park had signs indicating intersections that encompassed the park, and the crossways he needed wasn't too far. Oh yes, your astronaut fantasy, Vlad snorted, walking at Danny's side. How trite. Danny clenched his hands and flushed hotly as his eyes started to glow. He knew exactly what Vlad wanted, but he was basically ridiculing his childhood dream. Asshole, Danny thought as he made their way to the intersection without much fuss. A tense silence between them as Danny struggled to force his eyes back to normal. Once they made it to the intersection, Danny made a show of looking at street signs if he was orientating himself, while he was secretly looking for Peter on any of the roofs. When he spotted a dot of red poised at the ledge of the building, Danny felt a knot in his chest loosen with relief and his stomach swoop in anxiety. He started to make his way towards the subway entrance when Vlad clamped a hand on his shoulder like a constrictor, strangling its prey. Where do you think you're going, Danielle? Vlad asked pointedly. Danny swallowed before answering. Subway's quicker than a taxi. Danny tried to get out of Vlad's grip, but he just clamped down tighter. Do you want to spend an hour in a cramped car during prime New York City rush hour and risk losing you in the crowds? Why, I'd never forgive myself. Vlad grinned and started dragging Danny closer to the street to hail a cab. Nice try, Danielle, but not good enough. Vlad hauled him past the subway entrance and stopped at the curb somewhat close to get a cab. He probably did it to rub it in Danny's face, but Danny could use this to his advantage. If Vlad thought he didn't have any tricks up his sleeve, then he was in for a surprise. Danny waited until Vlad's car was down and loosened his grip on Danny's shoulder as he was opening the cab door. Danny pushed Vlad's hand off his shoulder, twisted back towards the subway entrance, swinging around the guardrails, jumping down the steps to the mezzanine. He knew if Vlad didn't want any concerned cab driver calling the police, he would stay behind to possess the cabbie briefly to erase some of the memories, which will give him some time. Car 456 arriving in 2 minutes. Car 456 arriving in 2 minutes. Next stop, downtown Briarwood. Next stop, downtown Briarwood, the intercom stated. The subway mezzanine wasn't as crowded as the one Danny had seen in Bronx, but that was probably because of the area. Most people were visiting attractions during spring break, not public parks. That was bad news for Danny, as he was hoping for more cover in the throng of moving bodies. He nearly crashed into the ticket machine, feeding it a couple of dollars while anxiously checking over his shoulder. The few people that were coming from the platform and headed towards the exit watched him warily, wondering what the hell his problem was. But Danny was just concerned on punching in the right ticket code. As soon as the machine spat out his single ride card, Danny grabbed it, rushed to the turnstiles, trying to go at a hurried pace so he wouldn't attract attention. Just as he was about to reach the turnstiles, he looked over his shoulder when he heard the obnoxious click of Vlad's leather shoes and saw him halfway down the stairs, walking at a brisk but casual pace. Car 456 arriving now. Car 456 arriving. Departure in 1 minute. Departure in 1 minute. Next stop, downtown Briarwood. Next stop, downtown Briarwood. Danny's breath hitched as his instincts to go invisible, intangible, pulled at his ghost core, but he grit his teeth and reeled in his ghostliness as he turned forward, holding his metro card in hand. Danny walked as calmly as he could to the turnstiles and swiped it through the card reader, not only to jerk back when the revolving arm stayed locked. Danny panicked and swiped the card again, and noticed the card was facing the wrong way. Come on, as he flipped the card round and listened to the sound of Vlad's steps get closer, he swiped the card frantically for the third time and swore he briefly felt Vlad's hand graze his shoulder, and the turnstiles gave way. Danny didn't bother turning round, afraid that Vlad might just turn intangible and go through the turnstiles. He dashed down the stairs to the subway platform, making sure to follow the signs to the downtown side, and nearly tripped over the last step. He stumbled briefly before he recovered and fled into the first open subway car he saw. He skidded to the nearly empty car, earning a few looks from the other passengers as he gripped one of the poles to swing himself into a seat. He glanced up through the window just as Vlad made it to stop top of the stairs. Car 456 now departing. Car 456 now departing. Next stop, downtown Briarwood. Next stop, downtown Briarwood. Danny breathed a sigh of relief as the car left the station and slumped into his seat, his head hitting the backrest of the chair. He took a moment to relax before he dug his phone out of his back pocket and dialed Wade's number. "Hey, Wade," Danny said as the call connected. "I'm heading to Briarwood Metro Station." Vlad smirked as he headed up the exitway, keeping tight control and trying not to shift his eyes as his core thrummed in excitement. It looked like his little expedition to New York would be incredibly more lively than he expected. Well done, little badger. Well done. Peter was waiting for them when Danny and Wade made it back to the safe house in the late morning, hauling Danny in by his shirt when he opened the door. Peter was still in his spider suit with his mask discarded on the table, and Wade in a similar outfit that he wore yesterday, his hood still up. "Are you hurt?" Peter asked, scanning Danny from head to toe, searching for injuries. "Did you use your powers? Do you need food?" Danny shook his head as Wade walked in and closed the door behind him. Fido, still invisible for now, anxiously flittering between Wade and Danny as they let out nervous chirps. "No, I'm fine," Danny replied, lifting his hand up to pet Fido on their next pass. "I'm a little shaken up, but not hurt." Peter let out a sigh of relief, his shoulders losing tension and his head slumped forward slightly. "Good," Peter said, rubbing Danny's shoulders. "That's good." Then Peter smiled tightly, gripping his upper arms a little harder, and Danny froze. He knew that look. He knew that look intimately. That was the look on his parents' face when they caught him in the light and all found out about his latest test grade. "Ah, shit," Danny thought. "What in the actual fuck, Danny?" Peter yelled, and Fido zipped to hide in one of Wade's hoodie pockets, the eyes peeking over the hem. You have been in New York for a total of... You have been in New York for a total of 5 days, and in that time, you have nearly been mugged, stabbed, almost murdered, and now you're being stalked by a person who you know the identity of. I just want to point out, Danny piped up, trying to calm Peter down. None of those were my fault. Peter groaned, cradling his head in his hands as he literally peeled them from Danny's shirt, as they made a Velcro sound next to them. Wade whistled, making Fido perk up a little more out of the hoodie pocket. Wow, Wade commented as he crossed his legs and leaned against the door. You got Peter to swear. Peter whipped his head up to glare at him. Wade, Peter ground out as he clenched his hands, you are a great and wonderful friend, but you make another comment like that, and I'm going to lose it. Wade minded zipping his mouth shut and putting his hands in his front pocket, which enticed Fido to curl his body around Wade's hand. Seriously, Danny, you've gotten worse luck than I do, and that's saying something, Peter continued, and Danny wisely kept his mouth shut about how his shit luck left him as half-dead, half-ghost kid. He figured Peter didn't need the stress of his life right now. Are we going to have to worry about him or your parents sending you on an Amber Alert? Him or your parents sending out an Amber Alert for you? Peter asked, and he thought about a moment, shaking his head. Nah, my parents would never forgive him for losing me in the first place, especially if I told them a bullshit version of events. He needs them to trust him. Vlad won't risk it. What is this guy's deal anyway? Wade asked as he pushed himself off the door and sat at the table, Fido swirling around his arms until they were perched on his shoulder. Do you want the short version or the long version? Danny replied as he walked towards the kitchen. How about the version that makes the most sense? Peter pleaded quietly, pushing his other hands towards Danny while Wade snickered. Okay, Danny said as he sat down. He's a crazy Fruit Loop that's obsessed with killing my dad and brainwashing my mom, sister, and I into being his perfect family? The apartment was quieter than a graveyard as Peter brought up one of his hands to his mouth to hide his horror, shock, and disbelief, while his other hand held his elbow. Well, Wade said matter-of-factly, that made complete sense to me. Fido, the absolute little shit, nodded decisively at Wade's shoulder. Although neither Peter nor Wade could see it, was probably a good thing Peter couldn't see it. Wade, Peter begged brokenly. Wade, please don't. Danny grinned at the antics before putting his elbow on the table and beckoning Fido to his hand. The little shade bounded forward and furrowed into Danny's touch as he pet them. His name is Vlad Masters, Danny elaborated, running a finger over the top of Fido's head as the shade vibrated happily. And he's a halfer like me, goes by the name Placimus. He was a friend with my mother and father when they were in college. There was a malfunction with one of my parents' prototypes that caused a pretty bad accident. He ended up stuck in a hospital for a year. Okay, Wade said, leaning back in his chair so he was balancing on the back legs. So why is he obsessed with you and your family? He kind of resents my dad for marrying my mum, Danny answered, continuing to shower Fido in attention by squishing their face gently, then rubbing their cheeks. He had a crush on her since they met. If the accident hadn't happened, they might have started dating. Turning into a halfer just made it into his ghost obsession. What do you mean by that? Peter asked as he moved his hand away from his mouth and straightened his attention. Danny flinched, and Fido chirped worriedly. Danny hadn't meant for that to slip. Fully realised spectres have themes, Danny said after he swallowed and licked his lips, slowly continuing to cuddle with Fido. Something they obsess over that keeps their identity and personality together. There's a reason why my parents call it an obsession. Something that disturbs what the ghost perceives as its obsession. They have to fix it. It's like a compulsion. Obsessions can be subtle or obvious. A person, a place, a concept. There's pretty harmless ghosts that haunt the post office at home, that obsesses over boxes. There's another one that pops up all over town when the menu that has been the same for 30 years changes because she's obsessed with observing culinary history of the town. Whatever it is, it drives the spectre's existence. Denny took a moment to take a breath and collect his thoughts. What's your obsession? Wade asked cautiously. Denny killed in on himself, hugging Fido in his chest as he laid his head down in his arms. He couldn't bring himself to look at Peter or Wade. I don't really know, Denny answered honestly. I try not to think about it. Took a joke that it would be about space because I wanted to be an astronaut when I was younger. Sam thought it was about being a hero when I started fighting ghosts, but fighting ghosts doesn't feel like a compulsion. It's something I just want to do and enjoy sometimes. Sure, but I'm not compelled to fight a ghost every time I see one. Usually I only fight them when ghosts are aggressive or cause trouble. It was quiet for a second as Wade and Peter protested what Danny had told them, while Danny continued to cuddle with Fido. The shade chittered in comfort. Why don't you like talking about it? Peter finally asked. Danny flinched again, slightly more violent than the last time. Vlad is considered a halfer by other ghosts, but he's more ghostly than I am, Danny answered as he shivered. I don't want to let go of that part of my humanity to be a stronger ghost, because I know what kind of monster it will make me if I do. I'm scared if I develop an obsession, I'll be more ghost than human. Is that why you're all handsy with Fido? Wade asked. You scared? Danny lifted his head out of his arms in confusion, as Fido made a questioning sound, straightening in the chair before he realised that Peter and Wade couldn't see Fido. To them, it looked like he was playing with air. Danny blushed as he buried his face back in his arms, squishing Fido tighter. Yeah, Danny moaned out. I fidget with my hands when I'm nervous. It's okay, Home Slice, Wade replied casually while Peter smiled fondly. Fido seems like the cuddly type, and Peter likes to play with his webs when he's bored, the spidery weirdo. Peter jolted out as he let out an embarrassed gasp. Wade, Peter whined, punching his shoulders. You said you wouldn't tell anyone about that. Wade huffed and crossed his arms. You literally made a web in the middle of the sewer to act like a huge tripwire in order to catch a giant mutant lizard man. Wade scoffed. Admit it, Pete. You've got some spidery obsession of your own hiding around in that brain of yours. Peter made a strangled sound as he blushed, Fido making his hiccuping sound as he attempted to laugh. Danny lifted his head and smiled, grateful that Wade lifted the oppressive atmosphere, while steering the topic away from something that made Danny uncomfortable. Once Peter's embarrassment faded, they continued on a more serious topic. What about this Vlad guy has you scared, Danny? Peter asked. Danny chuckled derisively. More like what doesn't, Danny said, glaring at the table. The first time I faced him, he possessed my dad, went crazy, almost hurt a lot of people, and nearly exposed my identity. And I nearly had to expose my identity to stop him. Possession? Wade shouted, slamming the front legs of his chair down on the floor. What is this? The Exorcist? It's not really like that, Danny explained. Most spectres can't possess people, and the ones they can have to have a certain type of host. Vlad is the only spectre I've seen that can possess anyone. But that's because he is slimy enough and he doesn't care about who he possesses. If someone's spirited enough, they can kick the possession off themselves. But it usually hurts them. That's why you didn't want either of us near you earlier today, Peter realizes. You were afraid he would have possessed one of us? Yeah, Danny said. One of the benefits of being a halfer. Other ghosts can't possess you. So what's your game plan against someone that can literally hold our bodies hostage? Wade asked, bringing a combat knife out of his pants pocket and flipping it dexterously in the air, another stick in his own. A chill not unlike his ghost sense went down Danny's spine. And Fido stilled in his arm, feeling anxious. Our? Danny echoed as he tensed. There is no our. There is no we. I'm handling Placimus by myself. Danny, Wade interjected, the knife pausing in his hands. You were practically shaking on the drive here. Yeah, well, Danny replied hotly. I've always had to learn on a steep curve. I fight ghosts that are stronger than me all the time. I beat him once, I can beat him again. Not with your power levels the way they are, Peter commented. Danny, we're adults. We've faced some powerful enemies ourselves. We can help you. No, you can't, Danny shouted as he stood up, his arms at his side. Fido cringed and floated towards the middle of the table to give Danny space, making a concerned chirr. Danny took a deep breath as he sat down. You guys don't get it, Danny whispered. Fighting a ghost is nothing like fighting a meta-human or catching a low-time crook, especially Vlad. He doesn't care who he hurts to get what he wants, and what he wants right now is to get at me. He's got all the power I do and more. He's smarter and stronger than I am, and he has more experience using his powers in places like these with low ambient ectoplasm. How are you planning to hit something that's you might not even see or feel? It was silent for only a moment before Peter spoke up. My spider sense, he answered. I can track him with my spider sense, and he has to be tangible at some point. We just have to catch him off guard. You said your parents hunt ghosts for a living, Wade piped, flicking his knife in the air. They bring any of their toys? Wade, Peter hissed, but Wade turned and glared Peter down until he backed off. Yeah, Danny said hesitantly. They brought a few. Then see if you can get us hook up. See if you can hook us up, Wade suggested, then added with a dark look from Peter, or at least get us something to protect ourselves with. You guys have at least figured out a ghost repellent, right? Alright, so maybe you guys can help, Danny conceded. Any ideas for a plan? You said this guy has more experience using his powers in places like this, Wade started, pointing his knife at Danny. That means he's under the same rules as you. If he runs out of juice. And here Wade mimed a gun with his other hand, pulling the trigger. Boom. Hasta la vista. Make it an endurance match, Danny exhaled, impressed by Wade's tactic. He didn't realise Wade was so smart. Bingo, Wade replied, and he doesn't know that we're your backup. So we've got the element of surprise. We still need to figure out a where and when, Danny stated. Goat's fight can cause a lot of collateral damage, and I need this fight to stay under the radar if I don't want my parents involved. At the mention of his parents, both Wade and Peter flinched, enough that Fido made a worried sound at them. Little Neck Bay, Peter answered, perking up. There's an abandoned shipyard there. Got some good vantage points I can manoeuvre from, and it's fenced off from the general public. We should probably do this later tonight, Wade commented, leaning his chair back. Less likely you'll be seen. Give us some cover over the dark. Will you be able to swing that? Donnie bit his lips. My sister found out about my ghost a few weeks back, Donnie stated. She's kind of determined to help me out any way she can with this ghost stuff. If I explain to her what's going on, she'll cover for me, but I might have to mention your alter egos. You guys cool with that? Peter tensed unhappily, while Wade flinched. Try not to mention me if you can, Wade replied. I don't want you getting flack about associating with someone with my less than stellar past. You got it, Danny nodded in complete seriousness. Peter? I'm not happy about it, but if that's what it takes, then do it, he answered. Just keep this as Spider-Man only. Danny nodded again, and it was silent for a few moments, Fido circling above their heads sporadically. What are we going to use as bait to get Mr. Tall and Creepy to the shipyard? Wade asked, twirling his knife between his fingers. Me, Danny replied, crossing his arms uncomfortably. He may have stalked my family across the country, but he had to find out where my family was staying by tracking my ecto-signature. Remind me to shove my boot up this creep's arse if I get the chance, Wade muttered darkly. So, what, we're just going to show up at the shipyard and he'll find me? He's watching the hotel, Danny replied. If he spots me leaving at night, he'll follow me, and he'll do it without powers if he wants to conserve energy. We just have to be faster than him. I've got that covered, Wade said as he pulled his combat knife away and pulled out his phone. Your taxi driver again? Wade chuckled as Danny chuckled as Wade punched in a number. Hey, Wade whined. Don't be dissing on my man Dopinder. Best taxi driver in the state. Danny chuckled again, shaking his head. With how the guy had managed to get them from Briarwood back to the safe house, Danny didn't even doubt it. Even if the way the guy drove nearly scared Danny out of his remaining life. So, we're really doing this, Danny breathed, not quite believing it. This would be the first time he had backup, and he was just as strong, if not stronger than he was. His first hero team. Yeah, Peter exhaled loudly. We're really doing this. Give us a rundown on yours and Vlad's powers so we know what we're up against. Danny made it back to the hotel around 3 in the afternoon, lucky enough to catch Jazz in the room before she explored another museum for the day. When he asked her if they could talk, she blinked, nodded, sitting down on her bed, giving him her undivided attention. He explained the whole situation from the beginning, showing her his Spider-Man picture, why he was eating so much lately, and about Vlad and what he was trying to do. He could tell she didn't quite believe him at first, but the seriousness in his voice and the desperate look on his face persuaded her. In the end, all she had asked was, "What can I do to help?" With Jazz's assistance, they managed to get the ghost RV without without their parents knowing, and started to collect the items Danny would need. Jazz swiped 2 anti-possession wristbands, a few cartilage of unfiltered ectoplasm that powered most of their parents' tech, a few empty syringes, while Danny grabbed 2 ectoguns, a handful of long ammo capsules for each. While Danny grabbed 2 ectoguns, a handful of long ammo capsules each for Wade. He would need all the ammo they could spare if Vlad decided to duplicate. When Wade had heard of duplication, he'd thrown his hands up in aggression. "Oh, you've got to be kidding me. What kind of Gary Stu OP motherfucking villain is this?" They headed back to their room again, and Jazz helped him with the painful process of injecting himself 1 dose of unfiltered ectoplasm. The ectoplasm in his emergency stash was filtered ectoplasm. It had no chemical contaminant and was more volatile than unfiltered ectoplasm, which is why his parents didn't use it for powering their smaller gadgets. If using pure ectoplasm was like taking a shot of adrenaline, unfiltered ectoplasm was like drinking a really bad energy drink. It did the job, but it had some side effects. In Danny's case, his ghost half had to clear his body of the chemical impurities in the unfiltered ectoplasm, which in turn made him achy and uncomfortable. The effects would wear off in 30 minutes to an hour, depending on how contaminated the dose was. Danny could use it in a pinch, but in general, it sucked. To play it safe, though, he dealt with it, as well as bringing 2 more unfiltered doses and what was left of his emergency stash with him to fight. As Danny tossed and turned on his hotel bed, trying to ride out the effects of the injection, Jazz prepped 2 other syringes with unfiltered ectoplasm before giving him the pillow from her bed so he could get comfortable. She sat down on the side of his bed, combing a hand through his hair and rubbing his back. "I'm really proud of you, Danny," Jazz said as he twisted to get comfortable. He paused after he rolled onto his back and shot her a questioning look. "For what?" he asked. "For a lot of things," Jazz shrugged. "You coming to talk to me instead of trying to get back up, to go behind my back, asking for help, being responsible. What isn't there to be proud of?" Danny felt something melt a little in his core, and he reached over to wrap his arms around her stomach in a hug. His parents never really said anything beyond a scolding about his grades, even when he managed to bring them back up, and he could tell sometimes they were disappointed that he didn't take after them. It was nice having someone proud at him when he was doing the things he felt was important. "Meet him as Vin, Jazz," Danny whispered as he squeezed her tighter. Jazz didn't speak Esperanto, but she understood the sentiment anyway. "You too, Danny," she said as she squeezed him back. Danny grabbed his backpack full of supplies and headed to the front of the hotel after a quick bye hug from Jazz, around 7:30, just as the sky turned pink and orange and the sun was starting to set. He made sure to hang around the sidewalk for a few moments, flaring his core slightly to get Vlad's attention, before he spotted Dopender's taxi and hopped into the empty back seat. They had decided before Danny went back to their hotel to meet at the shipyard separately, so Vlad wouldn't get any heads-ups. "Thank you for driving me, Dopender," Danny said as he shoved his backpack in the other passenger seat, getting comfortable. "No problem," Dopender replied, pulling away from the curb and easing the car into traffic. "A friend of Mr. Poole's is a friend of mine." Danny chuckled lightly before bringing one of his hands up to his mouth and biting his nails. With how Dopender usually drove, they would have been at the shipyard in 15 minutes, but they needed to be slow enough for Vlad to follow them. The plan was to lose him when they were near the shipyard, giving Danny enough time to show Wade how to use the ectogun and hand out the wristbands before he flared up and led Vlad to their location. which meant they had at least 35 minutes until they got to the shipyard, which gave him a lot of time to overthink and worry. While he tried to relax a bit, he texted Wade and Peter to let them know he managed to get some of his parents' gear. By the time they made it to the shipyard, it was nearly 8, and the sky was completely dark. Danny grabbed his backpack and got out of the car, swinging by the driver's seat to Frank opened it before climbing over the fence that surrounded the shipyard as the taxi drove away. The few office buildings surrounding the shipyard from across the street and shipyard were scattered with a handful of moving cranes, the metal structures rising into the sky like a rib cage of some kind of giant monster. A few shipping containers laid abandoned and open on one side of the yard, while 3 decrepit warehouses were clustered on the other. A wide pier with some kind of tracks jutted out into the water, littered with holes of seawater rusting away the metal. Puddles of ocean spray were everywhere. The whole place was cool and damp. Danny peeked inside one of the warehouses as he passed and saw it was empty, except for a few pieces of rotten wood and corroded metal. The roof in the farthest corner collapsed inwards. He thought about checking the other warehouses to make sure they were equally empty until he spotted Wade leaning against the centermost crane. He was dressed in Deadpool suit, sans swords, like Danny suggested, with a handgun in one of his upper thigh holsters. Facing towards the pier and away from Danny, Danny jogged over quietly to him and called out when he was close enough. "Wade!" Danny stage whispered. Wade turned to look at him. "Hey, Jesus Christ!" Wade yelled as he stumbled back from him, gripping his suit over his heart. Danny jumped and turned to look over his shoulder, but nothing was there. "What?" Danny asked, looking back at Wade. He was leaning against a crane with his arm. "For once," Wade begged as he caught his breath. "Just once. Could you and Peter stop finding new ways of scaring me?" Danny tilted his head, confused. "What?" Danny repeated. "What did I do?" "You've got eye shine, home slice," Wade replied, digging his phone out of one of his many pockets and showing Danny his reflection on the screen. Instead of black, the pupils of his eyes shined green as it caught the scattered city lights. Danny blinked. He didn't know his eyes could do that. "Oh," Danny responded, shrugging off his backpack, putting it on the ground, kneeling down to unzip it and bring out the supplies. "That's new. Cool." Wade sighed before dragging a gloved hand over his mask. "Now that you've filled your daily quota of giving me a heart attack, I think we've got a small problem," Wade said, and Danny tensed with his hands still in the backpack, tilted his head to look at Wade. And there was Fido, hovering over Wade's shoulder and smiling innocently at Danny. "You brought Fido," Danny yelled as he jumped from the ground, his voice cracking as he raised both hands to his hair in distress. "I knew I was being followed, but it's not like I brought them there on purpose, okay?" Wade snapped, clearly upset that Fido was there as well. "It's not like I can lock them in a cage or something." Danny scrubbed at his hair and started to pace. "Not good," he moaned. "Not good, not good. No, this is so not good. A stray hit from an ectoblast will destabilize them." Danny stopped by Wade and grabbed Fido off his shoulder, holding them securely in his hand, bringing them to his face. "What are you doing here, buddy?" Oh, shit. "Sistio esta Dagiela loco." Fido bumped his head briefly against Danny's forehead before determinedly wiggling out his grip and floating back over to Wade, clutching onto his neck and shoulder. Danny laced his fingers behind his head and tried not to panic. Both Danny and Wade perked up when they heard the of Peter's webs, and connecting to the crane they were under. A few seconds later, Peter was swinging down beside them. "Hey guys, what's—" Peter paused before shooting Wade an incredulous look. "Wade, you didn't. If by that you mean bring Fido along to the very dangerous mission, then no, I did not," Wade depaned before throwing his hands up. "They brought themselves." Peter groaned and raised his hands up to his eyes before turning his attention to Danny. "Can't you make them go back or something?" Peter asked. Danny shook his head. "They're determined to stay. The most I can do is power them up enough that intangibility is too hard to control. And keep them in my backpack." "Then we'll try that. But let's get fitted out first. You said you brought some of your parents' gear?" Danny nodded and emptied his bag. He grabbed the anti-possession wristbands first, handing out to each of them. The devices themselves looked like thick metal wrist bracers with small buttons on the side. When both Wade and Peter put them on, Danny pressed the buttons, which lit up green to indicate it was on. "This will prevent you from getting possessed," Danny stated, "but will not keep Vlad from touching you. Try to stay away from him if you can." Next, he was careful to lifted one of the ecto-guns by the muzzle and passed it to Wade. "Whoa," Wade exhaled, handling it with more familiarity, turning it over in his hands. "Your parents made these?" "You should see their lab," Danny replied, then gestured towards the ecto-guns. "These work pretty similarly to regular guns. The safety is here, slight trigger, etc." Danny explained, pointing to each. He reached into his bag and grabbed the ammo capsules, holding them out for Wade and Peter to see. "Gun, focus concentrated ectoplasm into a beam to replicate an ectoblast. They won't hurt you or Peter too bad. Maybe cause a mild burn if you misfire. But they will hurt me. So be careful with your aim. These capsules are on your ammo. These capsules are your ammo. If they each have enough ectoplasm to fire 13 shots. Once the capsules are empty, you have to pump this lever here, which opens the magazine. It splits open the old capsule automatically. You just have to insert the new one, push it back in." Wade nodded, following along with his instructions to get a feel for it. "You seem to know a lot about these," Peter commented, inspecting an ammo capsule and thought. "I thought you didn't like guns." "I don't," Danny said, reaching for the rest of the capsule, handing them to Wade. "That's because most of the time I'm the one getting shot at. My parents wanted me and my sister to be safe though, so they made sure we knew how to use them." He reached into his bag front table for his ectoplasm doses and put some in his pocket, too busy to notice Peter flinch and Wade fumble with the ecto-gun. "I could only grab 12 capsules," Danny continued. "I didn't want my parents to notice anything off. Sorry I couldn't grab anything for you, Peter." "It's fine," Peter responded. "Thank you for getting what you could." Danny nodded, then turned towards Fido, and then motioned forwards. Fido reluctantly floated towards Danny's hands. "All right, Fido," Danny started, exhaling an energizing mist over them, making them visible. "It's going to get real scary here in a few minutes. I need you to stay in my bag and hide, okay? Just stay here, and we'll come back to get you when we're done. I promise." Danny lowered Fido into his bag, but before he could zip it shut, Fido flew out and dashed to hide behind Wade, while eyeing Danny suspiciously. Danny sighed and hid his face in his hands, nearly bursting into frustrated tears. "Hold on," Wade said, handing the ecto-gun to Danny before reaching into the backpack. "I've got an idea." Wade zipped the backpack partially shut, leaving enough space that the bag was open slightly, then put one of his arms through the strap so that it hung on by his side, then turned to Fido, held out one of his hands, Fiddle cautiously landed in Wade's palm, nervously chirping. Hey, buddy, Wade said softly, patting the backpack with his other hand. Look at this nice little cozy spot just for you. Why don't you go ahead? Try it. Then you can hang out with me for the rest of the night. Fiddle curled up on Wade's palm, switching between looking at the backpack and at Wade. Wade carefully and slowly lifted Fiddle to the lip of the bag. Fiddle cautiously moved forward to peer inside before quickly backing out again. They made nervous chirr before sliding inside, making sure to keep their head above the lip of the bag, instead of zipping the bag closed like Danny thought he would. Wade slipped the other strap on his shoulder, then tightened them both so the backpack was secure, before reaching behind him and patting Fiddle on the head. This'll work, right? Wade asked, while Danny just stood there, shocked. You want to carry them around? Danny responded, handling Wade the first and then the second ecto-gun. At least we'll know where they are the whole time, Peter shrugged, crossed his arms. It's better than hoping that they don't wander into trouble. All right, Danny exhaled shakily, conceding the point, while still hating the idea of Fiddle being so close to the fight. Wade, just please. Don't worry about it, Holmes-Slice, Wade interrupted, sliding an ecto-gun into his empty leg holster and pulling his hand on Danny's shoulder. I've got them. Okay then, Danny gulped. Let's get this thing started. After they had gotten into the positions, Danny on the ground near the old entrance, Wade hiding in the closest warehouse, and Peter sticking to the side of the nearest crane, Danny had transformed into a ring of light, his t-shirt, jeans, and even his shoes changing into his trademark black and white jumpsuit. Peter felt a rush of something over his skin, and Danny tensed, glowed slightly before dimming. The process repeating a few times as Danny flared ecto-energy before stopping. They waited for 5 tense-filled minutes when Peter's spider sense bloomed, like nails wrecking along his back. Danny's ghost sense flickered as well, suddenly being abruptly appeared out of thin air. Vlad, or rather Placimus, wore a white jumpsuit with black accents. His skin sickly green, dark hair curled like horns. Danny appeared to talk to him briefly before Placimus shrugged, lifted his hand, shooting an energy beam from his palm. It blasted Danny back a few yards before he landed on his back on the ground. While Danny struggled to get back up, Wade leaned out the warehouse to shoot a volley of blasts from an ecto-gun. A few missed briefly as Wade struggled with the kickback before the next round of shots managed to hit. Placimus twisted with the force of the blast before going intangible and stalking towards Wade. Wade ducked back into the warehouse before exiting out of sight, using a side door and moving to the next position. By that time, Danny had recovered and flew back over to Placimus, knocking him back with an ecto shield. Peter saw the moment Placimus lost his concentration and intangibility slipped from his fingers. Taking what was his cue, Peter swung down and webbed Placimus's face, sweeping his legs out from under him when he was confused before. Peter webbed him up to the roof of the warehouse Wade had been using before. Danny used the moment to shoot his own energy beam, but Placimus phased through it into the ground before the blast could hit, leaving a smoking char on the ground, and Placimus reappeared a few moments later. They had continued this style of fighting for a while, Peter and Wade ambushing Placimus, while Danny continued to keep most of his attention. The tone of his fight shifted when Placimus duplicated, produced 2 clones. One of them flew off in Wade's direction, the other headed for Peter, while the original stayed to fight with Danny. Peter swallowed as a vampire-like ghost hovered across from his position on one of the cranes. As much as he hated to admit it, Peter was more worried about Danny and himself than he was about Wade. And he and Danny were taking more hits than he would like, but Wade was deadly with any type of gun, not to mention had a head for tactics, an unorthodox methodology due to his regeneration. There you are, you little pest, Plasmus hissed and raised his hands to shoot an ectoblast. Peter let his spider sense guide him, twisting the path of the ectoplasm around to the opposite side of the crane. He tried to dodge another blast by swinging to a different crane when his web line was snatched out of air and he was dragged to the ground. Peter landed on his side and back with a crack. Feeling free of his ribs snapped cleanly, he howled in pain. Arms curled around his injured side before he pushed himself up. When his spider sense wrecked across his back again, he looked round for a vantage point to swing to, and realized he had been herded towards an empty spot in the shipyard, too far away from the cranes to web to them. Nowhere for you to run now, Spider, Plasmus goaded, raising his hands again. Peter grimaced as he breathed shallowly with his broken ribs. I've been told I'm hard to catch, Peter replied, holding one of his arms out at the ready. We'll see, Plasmus smirked, then disappeared. Peter quickly shut his eyes and blocked out all sensation except touch and hearing. His spider sense pinged. 1, 2, 3 energy blasts. Left jab to the head, right jab to his upper chest, uppercut to the stomach. Peter dodged them all until he sensed an opening and struck down, feeling his hit connect and something crunch under his fist. Peter opened his eyes to see Plasmus' head thrown to the side, green ooze dripping down his face from his broken nose. You'll pay for that, Plasmus growled, his eyes glowing an intimidating shade of red as he raised both hands, fingers glowing ominously and energy whining in his high-pitched hum. Get behind me, Danny shouted, zooming in from out of nowhere, planting his feet firmly on the ground and raising his hands. Green ecto-shield dome slammed down just as Plasmus fired, the beams reflecting back against the clone in his surprised face. Clone melted into a puddle of vicious goo as Danny let the shield dissipate. He gasped for a breath while a white ring formed briefly before fading, while falling to his knees. Peter was instantly at his side, placing his hand on the back of Danny's jumpsuit and hauling him up with just his stickiness and strength before he got his shoulder under Danny's arm. Danny's jumpsuit was littered with holes, and he had green burn marks on some of his skin, and the most worrying aspect was he looked like he was about to pass out. Where's your emergency injection? Peter asked. Fruit Loop nicked it, Danny stated, looking exhausted and positively pissed. They both tensed when they heard the sound of slow clapping as the original Plasmus walked forward. I must say, little badger, that was quite impressive, Plasmus praised condescendingly, stopping a few feet away. But you're still so sloppy, so much wasted energy. Don't worry, I can teach you how to be better. Peter stepped forward while pushing Danny behind him. He seems to be doing fine by himself. Thanks, Peter stated. Plasmus snarled at being interrupted. Ah, yes, Plasmus replied while charging an energy beam and pointing it at Peter. The spider, I'm so terribly sorry for the inconvenience, but your presence is no longer required. Before Plasmus could fire, a green energy beam hit him in the chest from the side, knocking him back a step. All eyes turned to where the beam originated, and Wade was walking towards them with an ecto-gun trained on Plasmus. Hey-de-ho, neighbour! Wade sang, firing off another shot and hitting Plasmus in the abdomen, then discarding the spent ecto-weapon and grabbing his handgun from his thigh holster. Not to be a bitch or anything, but could you please get the fuck off my lawn? Wade's suit had a few new holes in it and was covered in a mixture of expended ectoplasm and his own blood, though it was difficult to distinguish the blood from his suit. Plasmus turned to glare at Wade, keeping Peter and Danny in his periphery. You stupid vulgar swine, Plasmus grunted as he shook off the pain from the two ectoplasts. You really think a simple handgun can harm me? Nah, Wade grinned, lighting his sights with Plasma's head, but I'm sure hell make me feel better. As he fired, Peter watched in horror fascination as the bullet tore through Plasma's face, spraying jelly-like ectoplasm in the air before it slowed and then swirled back to his body to reform his face like a particle effect. Wade continued to take shots while walking towards Plasmus, aiming at his leg, groin, chest, face, and Plasmus walked forward to meet him. While Plasmus was distracted, he tried to drag Danny somewhere else from the fight. Danny refused to budge, though, trying to aim his hand for an ectoblast, but his hand shook with exhaustion. When Plasmus was finally close enough, Wade tried to pistol whip his head, but Plasmus turned his head intangible and then grabbed Wade's neck with one hand and his wrist in the other, pointing the gun downwards before wrenching it out of his grasp. He held the gun up for them to see, and the gun turned bright orange as it melted in Plasmus's palm. Wow, Wade choked out as he lifted off the ground while Plasma shook the left-over molten metal from his hand. You should have bought me dinner first. Your obnoxious, vulgar personality bore me, Plasma stated in disdain, holding his hand out directly to Wade's stomach. Farewell. Vlad, Danny shouted, lunging towards them, but Peter knew he couldn't let Danny go. Vlad, don't! The ectoblast burst through Wade's side, leaving a crater eating 2 fist-sized chunks from his abdomen. Wade yelled as he was squirming in Plasmus's grasp before he was dropped to the ground on his injured side as blood and viscera pooled around him. God damn it, motherfucker, that stings! Wade howled as he held out what was left of his intestines in his abdomen. When my gut finished reforming, I'm firing a bullet up your arse. Peter nearly hurled and started to try and pull Danny away, but froze when the prickle in his neck associated with Danny turned into blades slipping down his spine. I'm dreaming, Danny thought dazedly while he was absent-mindedly clutching at his suit where his core was. I have to be dreaming. Danny had to be dreaming because Wade was lying on the ground surrounded by bits and pieces of himself. There was a lake of blood foaming around him, filled with little chunks of his kidney and intestine. Strings of skin and connecting tissue were hanging from the outer edge of the hole in his side, while blood bubbled out of his body like lava from an active volcano. He could see the rough edges of what was left of Wade's liver, and the gastric juices leaking out of pieces of his intestine. Well, Vlad said, sickeningly sweet. Your resilience is quite astounding. Danny threw up slightly in his mouth as he realized Wade was still alive and squirming in agony. Danny felt as if he was being pulled apart at the seams from the inside out. 2 opposing forces warring inside him. On the one hand, he was desperately trying to hold on to his ghost form and keep from passing out. On the other, he was pushed back against a tsunami of energy as his core vibrated violently in his chest. His entire being froze when Vlad leaned over Wade in interest. What is this? Vlad asked. He started to reach past Wade's shoulder. A shade? Danny's vision whited out as he drowned out his ghost core, overwhelming his humanity. Danny's ghost form rippled before Peter's eyes as Plasma's reached for Fido. The little shade clutched Wade's shoulder protectively. Peter wasn't the only one who felt the change. Plasma stilling before turning his attention back to Danny. Danny's pale skin bloomed in the same sickening colour as Plasma's, his iris turning bright red, and his hair flickering like white ethereal flames. Danny raises his hand steadily and fires an ectoblast. Plasma soared with the force of the beam, rolling harshly in the ground a few times before he stopped. Danny flew over to him instantly, his fist glowing with blue energy until it formed a spike chunk of ice around his hand. He hovered above the ground while he grabbed the front of Plasma's jumpsuit, holding him up with surprising strength. Flying high into the air before rearing his other hand back and punching Plasma's in the face. 1, 2, 3. Peter flinched with each hit as he rushed to Wade's side. Not used to Danny displaying this level of violence. What's happening? Wade ground out, trying to sit up. Fido trilled nervously, and Peter pushed them as gently as he could back into the backpack. I don't know, Peter exhaled, grabbing Wade from under his arms and hoisting him to his feet, making sure to keep his sights trained on Danny. I don't have a fucking clue, Wade. Danny beat down on Plasma, stopped for a moment, the ice in his fist dissolving. Were they talking again? It was still for a few moments before Danny tensed and gripped Plasma's jumpsuit with a free hand. Danny dragging Plasma's close as he whispered something. And then Danny screamed. Danny wasn't quite sure what was happening. One moment he was on the ground by Peter. The next he was up in the air with Vlad's suit clenched in one of his hands. What was he doing just now? My, Vlad ground out, spitting ectoplasmic blood on his chin, his eyes swollen pink. It's quite a look you've got there, little badger. Danny flinched when he finally felt and remembered. His ghost core had bloomed outwards from his chest. He needed to protect Fido, and Peter, and Wade, and Tucker, and Sam, Mum, Dad, Jazz, overwhelming and stifling the humanity he carried in his ghost form. No, Danny begged, trying to contain his energy. No, please, change back. See now, little badger? Vlad continued, his tone beseeching and almost soft. We aren't so different after all. I am nothing like you, Danny hissed, forcefully dissolving the ice that had formed on his hand. Vlad narrowed his eyes. That is easily corrected, Danielle, Vlad suggested darkly, his eyes glancing down at and Peter and Wade. All I have to do is get rid of your pathetic friends. Danny tensed, clenching Vlad's jumpsuit tighter. Don't touch them. Danny growled. Ha! Vlad laughed. Oh, you're what, Danielle? Kill me? Danny narrowed his eyes, grabbing Vlad's jumpsuit with his free hand to drag his face closer. No, Danny whispered in Vlad's face. I'll scream. He clutched Vlad's jumpsuit securely in his hands, leaning back, and withdrew a huge breath, closing his eyes. And then he screamed. Leave my friends and my family alone. The force of his ghost wail shearing off the ectoplasm of Vlad's ghost form, like scraping a knife across butter, leaving him dangling as a human in Danny's ear. Clenched hands, and there was a distant sound of shattering glass, and a car alarm was blaring a few blocks away, and the lights started to turn on in buildings. Danny rapidly descended back to the ground and flew Vlad to the concrete and stumbled, He went to his knees as he heaved for breath, as his ghost core receded due to the power depletion. His humanity returned to him as normal ghost form, but before a ring of electricity appeared at his waist and turned him back. Danny coughed, getting on his feet to check on Vlad. Vlad moaned on the concrete, turning over on his back, and stared at Danny in disbelief. "New deal, Vlad," Danny stated harshly, using all of his strength to stay upright. "You don't go near my family. You hurt my friends ever again, and I won't just reveal our identities to my parents. I'll expose it to the world. I'll bring the empire crashing down on you, and my parents will hunt you down for the rest of your life. Your choice." Vlad grit his teeth and nodded. Danny panted, falling backwards as he passed out. Danny woke up on a soft bed, a sheet of him blanket pulled over his chest. He blinked at the light on the house's ceiling before glancing up to his right, recognizing the barrette of the second bedroom in Wade's safe house. "Wade!" Danny seized, trying to swing himself out of the bed, when his entire body screamed in agony. He fell back on the bed, curling on his sides as all his muscles ached when he moved. Danny, relax. It's okay. You're safe," Peter said as he left, gingerly grabbed his shoulders and set him up against the headboard. "Wade," Danny whispered weakly, grabbing desperately on Peter's wrist. How's Wade? Is he alright? Where's Fido?" "Fine," Peter answered, rubbing his shoulders before sitting down in one of the kitchen chairs. "Everyone is fine. Wade stepped out to get food, and Fido's right here." At the mention of the name, Fido barreled into Danny's chest, wailing tiny cries of worry. They formed stubby arms to grip on Danny's chest, to hug and rub their face into his shirt. "But," Danny gasped, cradling Fido in one hand, the other clenching the blanket. "But I saw." "I know," Peter said softly, trying to soothe him. "I know, but wait. But Danny, Wade has an amazing regeneration mutation. He can heal from anything. I've seen it. Believe me, he's fine." "Oh, thank God." Danny sagged in relief, then cringed as his muscles convulsed. "Why does it feel like I've been run over by a truck?" "You mean besides the fight you just won?" Peter chuckled, leaning back into his chair. "Yeah," Danny smiled, petting Fido as they chirped into his chest. "Besides the fight we just won." "Fido found 2 of your ectoplasmic doses while we were leaving the shipyard," Peter replied. "You mentioned that sometimes they cause muscle pain, right?" "Yeah, I did. Thank you, Fido," Danny said, and Fido chirped happily, vibrating slightly. "I was wondering why I wasn't gnawing at the mattress when I woke up." "Honestly," Peter laughed, "I was worried about the same thing." Danny chuckled, bringing his other hand to scratch under Fido's chin, and the shade twittered happily. It was a sight for a moment, and Danny tensed as the atmosphere became strained. "What happened back at the shipyard, Danny?" Peter asked calmly, crossing his arms over his chest. Danny froze before hunching over Fido, bringing his knees to his chest, and hid his face. "I don't know," Danny whispered, starting breathing heavily. "I just saw Vlad reaching for Fido, and I thought he was gonna hurt them. It felt like my ghost core flooded my entire body. Peter, I blacked out. I don't remember parts of the fight." "Danny," Peter said, leaning forward, trying to calm him down, but it was as if Danny couldn't hear him. "It's never happened to me before," Danny exhaled with panicked breath. his eyes glazing over, and Fido whined in his distress. It was like I lost control. Lost control of everything. Peter, you have to believe me. This has never happened before. I don't know what happened. I don't know. Danny, Peter explained, jumping up to sit on the bed with him. Danny, hey, it's alright. It's okay. Can you look at me for a second? Danny shook his head while trembling. Heavy breaths as he started to hyperventilate. Hey, that's fine, Peter said softly. Would it be alright if I touched you? Could I give you a hug? Danny nodded as he was engulfed in Peter's arms, his face pressed into his shoulder as his breath stuttered. Good, that's good. Danny, try to relax. Take a deep breath. There we go. You're doing great. They stayed there for a while. They stayed that way for a few minutes. Fido squished between Danny's knees and chest, and Peter wrapped around Danny like a shield as he continued to calm down. Once Danny had settled, Peter pulled himself back to give Danny some space, but he stayed seated on the bed with his hands on Danny's shoulder. Danny, Peter asked, can you look at me, please? Danny lifted his head and looked at Peter through his fringe. I'm going to tell you something important, okay? And I want you to listen. It's okay that you lost control. No, listen to me, Danny. You were stressed out and overwhelmed. It's normal for people to panic in situations like that. You were afraid Plasmus was going to hurt Fido, and you stopped it. So you lost control, but the more important thing is, you got it back. You got it back, Danny. Danny's breath froze before it hitched, and he slumped forward into Peter's chest again, reaching up to clench his shirt in his hands. I was so scared, Danny whispered. I was so scared, Peter. Shh, Peter whispered back. It's all right, Danny. You're all right. In the warm comfort of Peter's arms, Danny nodded as he sniffed in Peter's shoulder. Hey guys, yes, sadly, this is the end of today's one-shot fic. As always, information will be in the description. Hope to see you again sometime soon. Bye!